or the title of Hilary's title. That didn't sound right, did it? No, not at all. Let's try that again. So the title today is Supporting Yourself and Your Loved Ones with Grief, Loss, and Change During This Challenging Time. So thank you, Hilary. I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you to the Alzheimer's Society for inviting me to be a part of this education series. Thank you to Kara for your support and being on screen for me today, and to Claire for your assistance with the tech. So Kara asked me what kind of a topic I would like, and it's coping with change. And at this time, as we know, that's an enormous subject to handle and to tackle. So we don't have enough time to do it all. It's overwhelming. There's so many scenarios, especially now in this strange time of COVID and everything else going on in the world. So I decided to go back to the basics of grief, and sometimes we just need reminder of the basic things in life. So thank you, Kara. Next slide.
So just give me 1 second here. It's not, let's just see here. All right.
Thank you. So what is grief? Grief is the normal and natural emotional response to loss or change of any kind. And that's the important part, any kind. Grief is the conflicting feelings caused by the end of or change in a familiar pattern of behavior. And that's from the Grief Recovery Institute. It's a complicated, I'm going to pass on, go to the next slide and I'll go there. Okay. What loss experience can reduce grief? So generally we think of death and divorce as the big ones, but there's chronic illness, mental health, and addictions in yourself and loved ones. There's job loss, there's pet loss, there's moving, there's financial changes to the good and bad. One of my first clients had just won the lottery, but lost all of her friends. There's a loss of trust. There's abuse. There's just so many things, and they can be big or little and just accumulate along the way. The longing for things to be better or different or have more of in the past, present, or future. And that especially applies to people with dementia and their loved ones. Next. So we're going to talk about different kinds of losses in a way. So the primary loss of the loved one with dementia, or the less than loved one, because relationships are complicated. And when you are having to take care of somebody that you may have had a complicated relationship with in the past, but you find yourself to be a caretaker, or they're in your family, and this is the losses that you're experiencing, it can be very, very challenging. Incremental loss would be the loss by little degrees, little bits at a time, little bits of memory, little bits of time spent, and they all add up into a big loss. The anticipated losses are, of course, the grief of the losses yet to come. Okay. Secondary losses. We don't think a lot about this, but secondary losses are large because they are and can be the loss of income, the loss of your identity and role as a partnership, an equal partnership, loss of dreams for the future, say all of your retirement dreams together, sharing grandchildren together. If these are your parents, there's so many different scenarios to this that going through all of them, but you can all imagine. Loss of your support system. Because you're so busy and you're so involved, you don't have all the time to go out and do and be able to support other people because you don't actually have the capacity to do that. You're concentrated on what you're doing. The loss of financial security, loss of confidence, loss of faith because of why is this happening? Okay. How does your grief manifest for you? What does it look like? How does your grief express itself? So grief is an emotional, sorry, you can hear my dog in the background. I apologize for that. I have locked him away, but still. Grief is an emotional experience, not an intellectual one. So let's go to the next slide, just for a sec. If you can go back, Cara, sorry about that. So going back to how does your grief manifest for you? Think about that a little bit. Are you a little bit more irritable? Irritable? Are you short? Are you tired? Are you exhausted? What does it look like for you? Okay, next slide. Oh, Kara, I'm so sorry. No, I'm so sorry, you guys. We're going to go back to the last slide. I'm not doing this very well. Okay. Do you find yourself easily angered? Are you just exhausted? Are you constantly moving and doing and keeping busy and you can't sit still? What are you doing to cope? These are called, in the grief recovery method, these are called short-term energy relieving behaviors. And sometimes this can look like drinking a little bit more or using drugs, shopping, spending money, gambling, food, eating too much, eating too little, keeping so busy just so you don't have to think, over-exercising, spending so much time on internet and TV. Anyway, these are things to think about and to notice. When grief and loss are overwhelming and you do not want to take the time to process, you just have to notice whether your way of coping with things is a healthy way of coping with things. Okay. Myths and misinformation on grief and loss. These are handed down from generation to generation in our culture and our society. And so you would have learned them from your parents and how they were taught and how they were taught. So one of them is don't feel bad. Don't cry. Don't worry about it. Replace the loss. There's plenty of fish in the sea, or if your pet died, we'll just get you another dog, for example. Grieve alone. You know that old saying, laugh and the world laughs with you, cry and you cry alone. So that's very isolating. Just give it time. Time heals all wounds. We hear that all the time. Be strong for others. Keep busy. These are the myths that we have been fed, that we also hold to high standards and admire. When we see all these people, oh, you're so strong, but we don't know what's going on behind the scenes. Okay? We are not taught how to deal with our grief caused by significant emotional loss or any loss. That's not been part of our vernacular. Our societal, cultural, and generational narrative on this has been so very detrimental for us. And instead of allowing our emotions to be heard, we are told to suppress them. Okay. So let's see. Go ahead. Here we are, 2020, COVID, and especially now in Nova Scotia, this is all rearing its head for us again. The world events that have happened in the last year and on, whether it's political or whatever going on, the upcoming holiday season, as well as the change into the darker season, the colder winter, all that kind of stuff. These things on just the world situation and COVID, and your reserves are done. You might find yourself much more tired, much more irritable, and hitting the last straw a lot faster. Okay, next. What can you do to support yourself? Supporting yourself while you're taking care of other people is a very challenging situation, but it's very, very important. And it's a balancing act. So I recently spent months supporting a client whose spouse has young onset dementia. And I asked what helped the most during our time together. And this is what we came up with. Okay, next slide. So the acknowledgement and validation of your losses by yourself and by others is the key to the feeling of being heard and understood. Call it what it is, grief. So while you have your head down and your blinders on because you are so very busy doing the next steps and the next steps and the next steps, caring for your loved one, or being the person with dementia, so just getting on with as much as you can with the day and your challenging diagnosis and everything like that, we don't actually acknowledge grief. We forget to talk about it or to name it for what it is because sometimes we don't recognize it. And going back into the beginning slides, when we were talking about the myths and misinformation that we heard about grief, and also what grief can be in all those different kind of scenarios, whether it's job loss or loss of trust or loss of faith, or just wishing things were different. Wishing your loved one or less than loved one never got this diagnosis is all grief, all right? So here's what we came up with. Here's what my client came up with as something that was really helpful for him. Find someone, a professional or a trusted friend, to really talk to about how you are feeling and what you are going through, warts and all, who's going to listen to you without judgment or opinion or platitudes or shoulds. And that's very important because those things are dismissive. Get help if you are the caretaker. You cannot do this alone. You need the help. You need the break. You need the time to rest, recharge, and to honor your emotions. Asking for help is hard. It's really difficult. But please get some help if you can. And then get more help if you can. I'm aware that this is a very simplistic statement. COVID, resources, availability of help all play a factor in this. But please do what you can to accept the help. It's not easy for any of us to do this, to admit this may be beyond our resources and our reserves and our capabilities, but try to do it anyway. Avoid talking to people that only offer opinions and judgment. You don't have the capacity or the energy for this. And yes, platitudes are dismissive, just like you think they are. They're invalidating to what you're going through right now. So try and ignore as best you can. Rest when you can, and do something every day for yourself, if possible, even if only for 5 minutes to get out of the house and have a walk and some fresh air. If you can, have a lunch with a friend, take some time to read a book. If you can arrange more time away to be with friends or an activity you enjoy, try and do so. It is not easy to do that because you're waiting for the other shoe to drop and you're tethered emotionally and in every other way to the person you're taking care of. So whatever you can do to give your brain and your emotions a break, try this. This is a long, heartbreaking, difficult time, and you spend it on constant high alert. So Please do not dismiss your very real and valid feelings of loss, sadness, grief, longing, and soul deep exhaustion. Okay, next. So the holidays are coming up. The holidays and COVID, your own life, the winter time, this strange holiday season we have, because we don't know if we're going to be able to share it with loved ones or not. We don't know if we're going to be able to get out. We may not have the reserves to even want to try to get out and shop. We may not want to even try to have a table with people or anything like that. We may be just alone with our loved one and feeling very lonely. And here's the thing. I want you to be as compassionate with yourself as you can this holiday season. We are being given a bit of a break with COVID because we don't have to put on the big splash. We don't have to do anything like that if we don't want to. So to know that you can give yourself the permission to rest, the permission to take things down, and to make it a more comfortable situation for you and your family, your friends, your loved ones, for you especially. Okay. All right, next. You can be grateful for what you have and grieving your losses at the same time. One does not cancel the other out. Please give yourself permission, I can't see that, to grieve. Perspective is wonderful at times, unless we are dismissing our own loss. Here's the thing, somebody has it worse than you, but somebody has it better too. So your relationship and your losses are 100% felt by you. They're unique to you. Your relationship is unique to you. And you don't need to compare losses. Somebody had it worse, somebody had it better. The thing is that any loss, it's your entire life that we are talking about. So I lost my father, and so many other people may have lost their father, but it's not the same thing, because my whole relationship with my dad is not your relationship with your dad. So we can't compare loss at all. All right. So some things cannot be fixed. They can only be carried. There are no stages to grief. There are no timelines on which we should be back to normal. There are no linear trajectories to this. It is unique as you are and as the person you care for. And unheard grief throughout your life accumulates, so you are grieving it all. Be gentle with yourself and compassionate. Treat yourself as a friend, as if you were someone you actually loved. And be kind in many, many ways. This is a very, very difficult time in your life. Next. So honestly, my presentation went faster than I thought. We don't have to worry about how having a bunch of time at the end. Again, when I was supporting my client, his grief, the client's grief, was incremental, and it built and it built. And there were times that things went really well and times when things were out of control. And it was about self-care and checking in with his self-care. Are you okay? Can you handle this? Are you taking care of yourself? What help are you getting? What breaks are you getting? Are you allowing yourself to cry? Are you allowing yourself to be sad? Are you allowing joy in your life when you can find it? Are you allowing the breaks and to build your foundation of what little happiness you still have in different ways? When you look at, say, for Christmas, the Christmas lights make you happy, and bringing it down to the smaller things that make you happy and still give you peace and joy. So this is really, really hard, this journey, this trip. And I want you to take care of yourselves.
Hilary, thank you. You know, you mentioned earlier there when you talked, because I've got control of the slides, I'm going to flip back to those if that's okay.
Yeah.
When you talked about, you know, we're coming up on the holiday season, and so many of us, we work so hard to have, like, to tick off all of those boxes. And so this year, as you said, we're really forced to minimalize, to simplify. I know we don't want to, but at the same time, you know, you talked about the big splash, how sometimes we get sort of thrown into it and thinking we have to do all of these different things. But oh boy, what a, you know, how heavy that is for us to hold too, though, right? Especially when we're grieving. So this year, as you said, at least we can take a step back, and so important, as you said, to take care of yourself.
Right. We're already exhausted. And then you add on expectations around holidays, having the house decorated, having people over, having food, trying to keep traditions up, trying to keep life as normal as possible. Right now, in no way is life normal. And COVID isn't normal, and your life dealing with your loved ones or your family members or people that have dementia is not normal in your life. This is all new. This is all something that we're living with. So please take the expectations off yourself.
And there's a lot of, as you said, you know, there's so many different losses that we sort of live through. And for people with dementia, sometimes it's that identity as well, right? There's that change in abilities and the loss of identity, and then the concern how other people will then treat them, you know, or communicate with them. And that can be really tough, you know, if you're a person who's watching today who has dementia. Yeah, that in and of itself is a loss. And then there's that social interaction. Sometimes if a person is grieving for whatever reason, people stop calling. Do you find that has happened with your clients, or is that something that?
Yes.
Yeah.
People don't know what to say. People don't know how to help. Their intentions may be good. Grief is an isolating experience, and going back to the myths and the myths and misinformation about grief, we are taught to grieve alone, and that it should be an isolated experience. And when you're out in public, I'm fine. And generally in public, you want to say I'm fine because that's safe. But this is why it's so very important to have a person or a small circle that you can talk to when you can say, I'm not fine. This is not fine. I need to talk about how sad I am, how much the losses that are building and building and building and accumulating are affecting me. And just the process of talking about it gives you some room. It allows some room. And it's like taking a boiling kettle off the stove and pouring some water out. Being heard and acknowledged that this is really, really hard. Having somebody to support you and acknowledge how hard this is gold. Instead of somebody saying, but yes, you could be grateful for. You had so much time together. You had this, that, and the other. Those are all intellectually true, but they're emotionally not helpful.
Yeah. And I think, you know, we've heard that so many times, and you had mentioned that in your slides. You know, it's like time heals all wounds. We hear that quite frequently when you're grieving, and it's not really helpful, like you said, right? Those platitudes.
No, and they make me, they can make me really upset from my own experience. And I have had a number of losses, catastrophic losses, actually. And the platitudes are actually dismissive in that way. Just saying to somebody, time heals all wounds, or I can't imagine what you're going through. Saying to somebody, I can't imagine what you're going through. Listen to this one. I can only imagine what you're going through. That's a whole different thing, because what that does is it's inclusive, it invites discussion, and it offers empathy. I can't imagine what you're going through is like, don't talk to me. I don't want to do that. I don't want to go there. And that's isolating.
Mm-hmm. And the key there is, as you said, having that support network. And so having that person who can just listen and not provide those shoulds, right? Because the shoulds are always, there's that judgment that comes behind the should, right? And so just being and holding a space for the grief.
But you know, the shoulds given by other people are no more than the shoulds we give ourselves. For example, we are exhausted. So we lie down and we watch Netflix or silly TV or whatever, and we should get up, we should clean the house, we should decorate, we should do this, we should do that. Your body is asking you to rest because you are processing grief and change and loss. So please give yourself the permission to rest, because if you don't, things won't go very well. You might get sick, and you cannot get sick, or you might just be overwhelmed with exhaustion. You know, there's just, you want to be able to allow yourself the time to grieve, the time to rest, be kind to yourself.
Definitely. Hilary, I've got a number of questions here. So maybe what we'll do is we'll jump into the question and answer portion. Thank you very much. I learned quite a bit today myself, actually, about grief. So thank you. I really appreciate it. And I think it's so timely, considering we are coming up into a season. It's winter too, right? It's getting darker, but we're coming into a season where we tend to be with our families more. So it's going to be really difficult on a number of people, especially for family who have family members that are in long-term care as well. So this is really timely, and thank you for sharing your information and your experience with us today. So a couple of the questions. What can you say to family members or others that say things like there are other fish in the sea?
So again, this is an intellectually true comment. There is other fish in the sea. Emotionally, that doesn't help at all. Because what you want to, at the time, you want to be supported with the loss you're feeling at the time so you can process it. So then you yourself come up with the answer of, there's plenty of fish in the sea. I'm feeling better now because I've been supported. My loss has been acknowledged as what it is, which is a loss.
Another one here, Hilary. There's no question this journey is the most discouraging and depressing time of our family's life. We were all grieving, my dad especially. How can I support him? My mom is in long-term care. She remembers him, but not us anymore.
Oh. How can you support your father? My suggestion, and for your consideration, I never want to offer advice. It's just a suggestion. A lot of children or kids, they call me and say, my mom is still sad. Our dad died a couple of months ago and she's still sad. And they've been married 62 years. So the fact is that your father is going to be sad because his marriage and his life have changed. And his spouse is in long-term care. And especially at this time when it's so hard to see them and they're not in their own house together and all that. So to acknowledge the loss and to not put a lot of shoulds and platitudes along, like, oh, but you had such a long life together or whatever, or she is. Acknowledge the loss. Acknowledge that this is really, really hard.
So it's to spend time with him, to be there for him. And maybe there's nothing that you can say or do, but
No.
you can be there with him
Right.
in the moment.
And you can do your best not to fix. There's nothing to fix. And again, I'll go back to that. Some things cannot be fixed, they can only be carried. So with time heals all wounds, and those two things together, time heals all wounds is not true. Time does soften things a little bit, and I will say that from my personal experience. But when you are in the midst of grief and you are carrying this, it is like a massive boulder that you cannot see around, through, or anything like that. This is all you see. This is your identity. Your identity is grief. Your identity is mourning for your loved one and your life that is no longer the way it is. As time goes, or certain parts of certain days, the boulder isn't quite as big and you might be carrying it in a backpack, for example, right? So it's how you carry it. It's not fixable. Do not try and fix anything, and try and be as patient as possible and allow your dad to rest, allow him to talk, and you don't have to rush to fix.
And I just have a comment here from one of our participants. I also think if you don't talk about your grief, you will exhibit itself physically, and your body will let you know you need to take time to grieve. I went back to work as a nurse after losing my father, needed to take a leave because I became physically ill because I held the grief within myself.
Yes, 100%. Great comment. I say to my clients, grief will go to your weakest point, because that's what I've noticed in myself and my clients. And I don't know who said this, but I think it's the greatest thing. We are processing centers, not storage units.
Yeah, that's great. That's
right.
Honestly, yeah.
I don't know who said it, but good for them, because if we store all this stuff, and culturally we have been told to stiff upper lip and all that, but we get sick. And that can also be trying to cope with everything. Well, that glass of wine is going to turn into 3 to 4 to a bottle a night. So you need to talk about things. We don't want to get sick. You're also, when you are taking care of somebody, and this is something I tell all my clients, and I should have put it in this slide, so sorry about that. You have to be very aware of driving, of even moving around your physical perimeters, because you're going to be bopping into things and banging into furniture because you're so preoccupied and thinking and processing about everything else. So slips and falls and driving and accidents and illnesses and everything, you have to be very aware of these things while you are occupied being a caretaker or being a person with dementia or anything else. Watch your physical self.
Very true. There's another comment here about how do I cope with my mom not knowing me? Blank stares and glares. And so, of course, that's obviously a person who has dementia. How do I cope with that? And that's really difficult.
How do I cope with that? Question has so many layers to it. Mm-hmm. How do you cope with the grief of my mom not knowing me?
Yeah.
How do I sit with my mom and offer my time and energy with her when she doesn't know me? It's very heartbreaking. It's very difficult, but you're offering your presence. And you can kind of, if your mother allows you to hold her hand, you can offer that warmth through touch. And allow yourself the time to grieve the loss and to acknowledge it for what it is. This is very heartbreaking that your mom doesn't know you anymore, that she got this disease in the first place. We wish things were different. We wish they were better. We wish we had more time. That's grief.
And I think what adds on to that is the fact that as a person ages, they may lose their friends. I think it's the same person that commented to say that all of those close friends are no longer there and the coworkers are no longer there. So there's that grief as well that
Right.
people
And
will
that
feel.
was part of the secondary losses, the loss of our support system.
Mhm.
And, you know, depending on your loss, people may not want to be anywhere near you because they can, it almost feels contagious, which it's not. But there is such a pushback to that in many ways. And also, if you're much older, you have gone through the loss of your friends and the loss of your coworkers. So everybody is collectively feeling this grief.
Another question here, Hilary. Listening to this makes my reality very real. How long will a family member grieve after a loved one has passed on?
Wow, that's a very good question. There are no timelines to this. Personally, I have lost my mom, my dad, my sister, my son, and my best friend. I will always be grieving in a way. I will always remember and love them. Some days and anniversaries and holidays are going to be particularly difficult and loving and sad and lovely and joyful for knowing them and loving them and all that kind of stuff. I prepare myself for those times. But there is no getting back to normal after you have loved somebody and lost somebody. You can't unknow what you know. You have known this time with this person, so now you have evolved and developed, and you don't go back to not knowing that. So it softens over time. It changes over time. You may not be in this you know, organically screaming, totally enveloped in your grief, but it's there. You know, it's an underlying sadness, and sometimes it comes up. There are no timelines. This is not a linear trajectory, because sometimes you can be going like this and then go like this and you're like this and you're all over the place, right? The stages of grief, which keep getting trotted out 50 years later, that was Elizabeth Kubler-Ross when she was 50 years ago, documenting people with a terminal illness and how they felt in the very limited scope that was at the time. It's been helpful in certain ways, but unfortunately, it does nothing for after loss. We also have a timeline thinking, well, after we're going to give you a pass for a year, you can grieve for a year and then look at the time, you should be okay. That's not necessarily true. Because after the year, which is like an endurance test, the first anniversary, the first Christmas, the first whatever, we expect to be better at that year. And actually, to know the information that the second year is when the reality really hits. Mm-hmm. Oh, I remember at the first year, at the loss of my son, okay, I made the first year, you can come back now. And then the reality is sitting in that, no, this isn't going to happen. So to have that information and know helps to know, or helps you to process this, that this is a normal reaction to grief. Mm-hmm. In the Mexican culture, they have a 4-year kind of timeline where things shift. In our culture, we got about 5 minutes. You know, people, you have a loss and they say, so sorry for your loss on social media, and life moves on for them, but not for us. So if you give yourself the permission to authentically feel your feelings and call them for what they are, you will be helping yourself process.
I just had a comment here from somebody who said, thank you for the presentation. She said, I never thought about the phrasing. And I think sometimes we don't think about the phrasing or the language that we use. But for her, I can't imagine what you're going through. She didn't realize, or he didn't realize, how problematic that it could be. So they said that they're going to try to avoid that in the future from using that.
Well, thank you very much. Because it's really important to be inclusive and to add empathy in everything that you say. The best thing to say, I have no words, and I can only imagine how hard this is for you. That is helpful because the person feels seen and heard, understood, and cared for.
Which is so important, you know, when you're going through a loss, when you're grieving. I think we can end with this question, actually, and it's something that we can all take away. Some people don't know what it is to be compassionate to themselves. What would be some examples of self-compassion?
Well, now this is a big question. Okay, self-compassion. I'm telling you, when I would lie on the couch and watch Say Yes to the Dress for 3 hours, where it felt like normally my brain would fall out with that kind of stuff, right? Excuse me. I knew that I needed my brain to be occupied while my body was processing all of this pain. So self-compassion is giving yourself the permission to rest, which we don't do. Self-compassion is giving yourself the permission to put off something that is not that important. If the laundry can wait till tomorrow, let it wait till tomorrow. Right? Yeah. Holding ourselves to keeping busy, doing, because if we stop, we're going to collapse. That's not self-compassion. Allowing yourself to kind of fall into it and lean into it. It's a scary proposition, but it is the better way of doing things because it allows yourself to have some room, right? Sometimes we don't have days and days or even hours to rest, to give ourselves that time. Try and make some little bits. Self-compassion is not being hard on yourself. Self-compassion is treating yourself as if you were somebody you loved. And that's a Brene Brown quote. So be as compassionate to yourself as you would to your best friend or to your child or to your parent.
Great suggestions for sure. And like you said, that self-compassion, we're more compassionate to the people, you know, our families and friends. And sometimes we're our own worst enemy. You know, we beat ourselves up so much, right? And so this is a period of time when you're grieving, you really have to check in with yourself, right? 100%. Because you carry it, we all carry it. And grief is very individual as well. So.
And that's why, going back to the slide, and this was also, I apologize for my dog. I noticed he's quiet now. Anyway, going back to the times of how does your grief show up? How does it manifest for you? Are you feeling very irritable? Maybe you're not realizing that grief and anger are very kind of ways of showing up. Are you short-tempered? Well, we're all a little bit on edge just because of COVID. Then you add your own personal life on top of that, everybody's a little irritable. And we're grieving not only our own personal losses, but the world right now. So we got a lot to carry.
Yeah, it's a lot to carry. And so it's so important for us to recognize that and to be, like you said, to hold that space and to be compassionate, right? Really, really key. So again, Hilary, we thank you so